celebrated British concert pianist John Lill won the Tchaikovsky competition in 1970 and has since then developed a fantastic career playing with all the top orchestras and conductors around the world. He's won many prizes and accolades for his playing, and in 2005 was awarded the CBE for his services to music. So I'm thrilled that he's joining me here today at Steinway Hall in London for a classical conversation. Welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. It's good to be here. Thank you.
And I'm just going to start by asking you all about your musical education, how old you were when you started, why you started, and whether you come from a musical family.
Well, to answer the last question first, no, not a musical family. I think my father was gifted, he could vamp and he could sort of play any instrument very roughly. But he was a very, very gifted amateur cartoonist, but he didn't make any money out of it. So that's the art side of the family. My mother was very wise and very great supporter, and she instinctively made the right decisions about what I should do. But they tell me I picked out tunes on a neighbour's piano when I was about 3.5 or 4, and I couldn't be removed from it. I was always there. So there was some strong magnetic force that kept me there, or some force,
yes.
Not necessarily magnetic. And then eventually they scrimped and said they were quite poor, and in fact they were very poor, and they got a beaten up second-hand upright piano of their own, which of course I loved. But I soon beat that to bits, and after about 2 years they got another one.
Right.
That's the way it began. And I gave my first concert when I was about 9.
Right.
And that was Beethoven sonatas.
And so which teacher then do you think, or teachers do you think was most crucial in your development?
I had different teachers and I kept chopping and changing, especially when I got a scholarship to study full-time at the Royal College. I was very headstrong then, I suppose I still am, but I always felt I knew best. And of course I was wrong on many occasions. But if you're a soloist, in the end, I think you really have to be convincing. And if you're not convinced by what you're playing yourself, if you're just copying somebody else or imitating somebody else, you're on the wrong track. It has to be inevitable, and inevitably you who makes that communication.
Yes.
I mean, it's a three-part thing. It's the creator of the music, the composer, the recreator, which is the performer, and the receiver, which is the public. I think they're all necessary. That's one of the reasons why I don't like recordings, because it's only 2 of those components in a cosy little studio. I like the idea of walking on a plank, having one chance to get it right. It's a good challenge.
Exactly.
And that atmosphere from the public is very important.
Yes.
It's a very, very powerful ingredient of any concert.
So which teachers then do you think, did you think you learned the most when you were at the Royal College?
Again, I changed. I left after 2 years because of the pressure of concert work. I did a Rachmaninoff Third Concerto at the college with Sir Adrian Bolt when I was 18, and that produced a lot of publicity. And then, of course, there was a big demand for my work as a pianist. So I left early. I had 2 or 3 different tutors, and I learnt a bit from them all, but I think I've learnt most from attending different pianists, when given the acid test, going to their concerts. Because talk is easy, talk is cheap, but action counts far more than words.
Sure.
And I think I learnt more than anybody by watching and listening to Claudio Arrau, probably still my favourite pianist. And I was lucky enough to know him and saw him quite often. And we got on very well indeed. He was an incredibly humble man, not at all full of himself as so many artists are. But I think the case is that the top people in their field are like that. I was lucky enough to meet Shostakovich, who came to one of my concerts in Vienna, and he was as close as you, talking through an interpreter. Completely natural, very nervous, but very natural, nothing superior. And of course it made my decade, meeting him. So Claudio Arrau, I think, was mostly the contributor to what I've developed. He was a guiding light, if you like. But that said, you still got to be true to yourself.
Yeah, sure. How did you develop your technique? Because for me you look like a very natural player, but did you ever work at technical things?
I've been lucky to have, always had a pretty natural technique. It's been self-inflicted, if you like. It's just developed naturally. I do think it's a very important thing to be relaxed when you play, physically. A lot of people, they throw themselves around, and all this misdirected energy, which should be going into the fingers, is going into something else. It's wasted. That's why I hate affectation or even fashionable approaches to works, because there's only one right way as far as I'm concerned. And that's the inevitable way it has to be at that concert. Now, tomorrow could be a different set of circumstances. Your blood pressure might be different, your mood might be different, acoustic might be different. So again, why I don't like recordings so much, because they fix you to one predictable thing, whereas a concert is always new and fresh.
You won the Tchaikovsky Prize. What impact did this have on your career? It must have been a significant moment.
Yeah, it was colossal because it gave me, although I was very busy giving concerts at that time, it gave me a premature sort of international passport. So I then, travelled widely over the globe giving concerts. I think I took on too much for 2 years or so because I was anxious not to cancel the previously booked concerts by people who had the courage to put me before it was safe to do so.
Yes.
At the same time, I didn't want to refuse too many of the new requests, obviously. So I was living a double life for a couple of years, the older concerts and the newer ones. But that was a very busy period. I was doing about 130 concerts a year. And I don't think musically I progressed because of that. It was just so much travelling and so much playing. And then I realised, of course, you've just got to give yourself time and you've got to give yourself space to learn new repertoire and to keep the music you're playing fresh.
Do you think then that the competitions are still a good way for a young pianist to establish their career? Because there's so many of them.
Yes, there are too many, I think. When I did the Tchaikovsky, there were only a handful of very notable competitions. And I think now they are so common and they're so, not questionable, but I think they're a necessary evil, if you like. I mean, we've always had competition. People are competitive. Look at the whole world of sport.
Yes.
And even Beethoven's day, he competed by improvising at certain competitions, things like that. People are always judged. If you give a concert, it's like a miniature competition. People judge you. You're compared with somebody else. So it's necessary, but I don't particularly like the idea of it. And I think there are very many chances of doing very well without having to win one. I mean, a lot of famous pianists didn't win a first prize. But of course, it's a useful tag to have.
Yes.
But as far as I'm concerned, it was a marvellous experience to have. But I'm only as good as my last concert. You just got to be very true with yourself and be your own severest critic.
Yes. Now you're renowned for Beethoven, and this is your 70th. I hope you don't mind me saying it's your 70th birthday year, and you're playing the complete sonatas several times. You just doing them at the Bridgewater Hall and at the Duggan Hall in London. So what is it that draws you back to these works time and time again?
Oh, they're just incredibly great. I mean, Beethoven is something special to me, always has been. I think it's the strength and the directness of the utterance, the sincerity, and the complete lack of affectation in his writing. Completely direct. Also, the range of imagination is monumental. I mean, from the deepest tragic moments, the most profound utterances, to the most hysterical humour, everything. And I think at his greatest, his music goes beyond emotion. It's pure spirituality in the end. And that's something which is so rarely found in modern life because it's so materialistic and so instant, full of instant gratification. And the media and educational systems, successive governments don't really help.
No. Okay, it's interesting. What other composers do you really love to play?
Oh, there are so many, and it depends very much on my mood. Bach, of course, joins Beethoven to me at super genius level. But then Mozart to Brahms, these people are very special to me. But Schumann, you see, how can you live without that? Haydn and Prokofiev, some of the Russians, Rachmaninoff.
Yes, for sure.
Schubert's fantastic music. I mean, we are so spoilt as pianists to have such a wide repertoire to choose from. I mean, if I played the serpent or nose flute, I'd be pretty hard up when it came to repertoire.
What repertoire, if any, do you find challenging? Or you probably don't find anything challenging, but what is it?
Well, perfection is impossible in this life. Everything has to be mastered if possible, but you can never actually get perfection, whatever you do. But it's the approaching it that gives you the buzz. And I think every work has different sorts of difficulties.
Yes.
It's not dependent on speed or numbers of notes. It's dependent on getting it right. And a Mozart sonata, with its economical writing, can be probably more difficult than a demanding Rachmaninoff concerto to perfect, or to try to.
Yes.
So it's really not the question of how it looks on paper. It's the question of the inner meaning and the little subtleties, the little rubato passages, which should always be natural, never self-inflicted.
Do you have a particular practice regime? Because I
Yes,
know
I do.
You do, because I know you've got 70 concertos at least in your head.
Yeah, I like to work with a stopwatch, so I always like to net, let's say 4 hours, 5 hours a day, which means you've got to be there for longer because of answering the phone or going out or getting a walk or something. I feel that discipline does bring strength, whatever you do, and I think, although I'm not particularly disciplined, I think I am in my work. And practicing to me is very, very important. that you predetermine what you're going to do.
Right.
I'm going to learn this piece today, and I'll have it memorised by tomorrow. I'll say to myself, and you have to work towards that. Otherwise, you'll just flap along and do very little. But I'm very lucky because I can make a lot of noise where I live and nobody appears to hear anything. I think musicians can be very selfish with the noise they make, especially in hotels and places like that, which I always refuse to play in. I'm very aware of that, so I'm very lucky.
Which venues have you loved to play in? Do you have a favourite venue, or is there lots of different ones you love?
In Britain, my favourite really has to be the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, where I'm now doing these complete Beethoven sonatas. To me, as a pianist, it's a perfect acoustic and beautifully designed. But of course, Birmingham also, the Symphony Hall there is very, very good. London is disappointing. It needs a really good symphony hall itself, which really it doesn't have. But there are many worldwide. I mean, you go to a place like Seattle in the States, you get a wonderful hall there. I'm doing a recital there next year, and I play there annually. But there are certain areas in the States which have got excellent halls. Dallas, and of course in Russia, many fine halls. None of them particularly large in Russia, it's interesting, but they've got fine characteristics. And I recently played for the first time a recital in Beijing, and that hall was quite new, 2 years or 3 years old. Wonderfully impressive, marvellous sound.
Yes, time is really coming up.
Yeah, yes, and the talent that's coming from the country, you know, everywhere you listen now, you go to any competition to hear. I was adjudicating a competition in Brisbane when I was in Australia recently, and mostly Orientals, and very high standard. And I regularly go to Japan. There are many, many fine halls there too. So it's an exciting job. It's never 2 days the same.
What's your most treasured musical memory, if you have one?
I suppose the announcement at Tchaikovsky competition. I was first prize winner, joint first prize winner with Vladimir Krainev. Sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago. But also attending Arau doing both the Brahms concertos in one evening with Sir Adrian Boult conducting Festival Hall. That was a very special concert, and I can still remember the thrill of it. It was just an amazing experience. Must have been 1962 or 3. And a handful of concerts like that, but if you want one, I would say one of, well, concerts I've attended, I would say that one. The one with Boult and Arau, both the Brahms.
What exciting plans have you got for the future? This is an important year. You've got a lot of concerts this year.
Yes, it's especially busy this year. My plans are simply to get better and better and realise there's no limit to that. I'll always be, as I said earlier, your severest critic. It's very important. A few critics are worth reading, but it's a small percentage. And I think really it's one other person's opinion.
Yes.
And sometimes you get an appalling review when you know you've done well. Sometimes you get an appalling review for a concert you haven't given. That's happened to me twice. Other times you can get a rave review when you know you played badly. So I think that's even worse. Always be true to yourself, I think, in the end, and never feel that you're better than you are. Always realise that perfection is up there.
What does playing the piano mean to you?
It means I'm in charge of an orchestra. I don't like the idea of it just being a percussion machine. I mean, it's a wonderful one-man band when you think about it. But it's an orchestra. When I play, and I love symphonic works, I try to make it into an orchestra. And I think if you're an illusionist, which you have to be as a pianist, it can actually work. The public can be aware of far more colours than the thing is technically able to produce. You have to be a bit of an illusionist or a large illusionist to do the work properly. So I think of it as an orchestra.
Thank you so much for joining me today, John.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You.